right, I think I'll gently get us started, and if others join us in a minute or two, we'll admit them, and we'll have a few more minutes before we start connecting. So thank you for jumping on today. We're excited to have you join us for this Innovation Pathways webinar focused on preparing for the Part B submission. So everyone who's here, I believe, is moving into the Part B process, unless there's a few visiting us today for the first time that I wasn't aware of. But we are really excited to have you with us and to share with you in sort of a collaborative learning experience as we get ready for the next round. So we will move into a few logistical housekeeping details to orient you. I believe I recognize almost everyone's name in the room, but there's a few of you who haven't been with us for a prior event. So just a really quick primer. There are live notes captured for those who would benefit from closed captioning. You can access those in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And it sort of opens a window for you to be able to see the live closed captions through Otter. And this will allow us to create a transcription, which along with a recording, we are recording today, will be published in the not too distant future for those who would like to share this with colleagues. I think that will be particularly critical as you're working on Part B to make sure that you have others on your team that are in the loop with everything that you're getting today. Introducing our team, for those who aren't yet familiar with us, we are joined today by some of the folks you see on your screen. Jennifer Gwatkin, the Innovation Pathways lead at DESE, is with us and will be actually sharing some information with us over the course of this webinar. I'm Diana LeBeau. I'm the Director of District and School Design Programs at the Center for Collaborative Education. And some of my colleagues are with us today as well. Laura Toda, Callie Cornell, and Callie Larson are all joining us today. I will also note, although he's not on here, that David Baird from DESE is joining us as well. These aren't all the faces you'll see at all of these webinars and workshops, but these are some of the core folks you'll hear from and see the most frequently. So we welcome you. So CCE is an organization that is partnering with DESE to provide technical assistance on innovation pathways this year. Among other things, we are doing a Design Institute series. We are providing webinars, and we are helping to facilitate professional learning communities for those, two of them actually, one for those going through the application process and one for those who are in early implementation to support each other through implementation. And today, our focus is really on, as I noted, helping you all prepare to submit a successful Part B application with the help of the tools, resources, peer feedback, and technical support that we can find time to offer today. We hope that you'll become familiar with some tools that will help support you when you are in your own design teams or working at your own school sites. And finally, we will provide opportunities for you all to interact with each other because we really believe in the importance of connecting across the designee network or prospective designee network, as the case may be. And we also very much subscribe to the belief that a great deal of the wisdom is right here in the room. So we'll start today, after I'm done with these connections, with a little bit of a walkthrough of some design process and tool resources that will become increasingly critical in preparing the Part B application. And we'll specifically focus on one tool that may be useful to you as you hopefully begin to expand your teams and begin thinking about who you want to have at the table to complete your final application. We will have something that's embedded up here I want to highlight before we go there, though, is we will have the opportunity to hear from a current Innovation Pathways designee about her design process, and you'll get a chance to ask her some questions so that you can really hear from somebody who's been in exactly the shoes that you're in, what has worked well and what are some lessons that she has learned. So we'll hear from her in a little while as well. After all of those pieces, we'll have a chance for some brief breakout groups and discussion, and we'll open up for some general Q&A. As I noted, Jennifer's in the room too, so if there's any specifics that you'd really like to hear from her about, that will be a great time to ask those questions. And we'll bring it to a close, and actually we're really delighted. I have a really fantastic little video that we'll be closing out with. That I hope will bring some light to everybody's day. Before we dive in, I will just close this section by saying that we know these are unusual times. We hope that you'll be able to engage deeply with us today. We do set up our webinars to be highly interactive, but we also acknowledge that you all are in unusual circumstances. And one thing this cartoon, I hope, highlights is that these unusual circumstances are helping us hone skills that we didn't have the opportunity to hone as much before. For example, I have never been such an expert on Zoom as I have been for these last 6 months. I'm not sure I'm ready to go to a job interview as a hologram, but I hope that this gives you a few laughs and thinking about what it's like for students engaging in work-based learning in an unusual context. I'm hoping that they're making lemonade as well. So really quickly, I'd love to give you all a chance, because I did say there's a few new faces joining us, and also for you to hear from each other. Briefly just sharing in the chat your name, your school or district, or both, and your response to today's prompt, which is for you to share an inspiring moment in your Innovation Pathways planning process this fall. It could be a student story of a student you've encountered that's inspired you. It could be an aha moment you've had with colleagues or anything else. So please do just add to the chat with anything you'd like to share from this list. Give you a minute or so to respond. We have a couple of principals joining us. Welcome. I know in each school or district, there's kind of a different role. Sometimes it's leading the application process. In some cases, it's a real collaboration. We do encourage you to start looping in any colleagues you'd like to be included in some of our future Design Institutes and webinars as a great way to bring them up to speed with some of the Innovation Pathways work. I see that some of you have started adding stories about little inspiring pieces this fall. And I love seeing that you've discovered new flexibilities that maybe you didn't know were there, that some students are really part of your inspiration, and that you're excited by some of the buy-in that you're surprised perhaps to be seeing in your schools. And I also acknowledge, as a few of you saying, that you are not yet up to speed and feel like you're a little bit at sea still. And I'm hoping that over the course of today's webinar, you'll have the chance to catch up a little bit. We also encourage you to check out our website, which includes materials from past webinars, including one we held in June for prospective designees or those going through the application process, to really give a primer on what Innovation Pathways is. Jennifer just posted the link to our website, which has all of those resources. So you and anyone else who'd like to catch up for anything we offered in the past, I encourage you to check that out after today. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourself and some things that are inspiring you. And now I think I will turn it over to my colleague, Callie Cornell, who will lead us through the next part of our agenda, where she really does lay out some of the basics of Innovation Pathways and some of its core characteristics.
Great. Thanks so much, Diana, and welcome everybody. Great to see some of the things that you've shared so far. So as we outlined in the goals for today's webinar that Diana reviewed just a short time ago, we wanted to share and give you a chance to become familiar with the tools and resources to support you as you continue to design and plan for your pathway programs. So the next few slides will talk about specific requirements that are needed for Part B application the applications and the tools that can help you sort of think through and plan through a lot of those elements. If we could flip to the next slide, please. One more. Excellent, thank you. So these are the guiding principles for innovation pathways, and they should look familiar to many of you at this point. So these 5 guiding principles are key to innovation pathway program design. And in order to receive designation, applicants are required to demonstrate that their programming is rooted in all 5 of these guiding principles. Those principles are listed here on the screen. Equitable access, guided academic pathways, enhanced student supports, connection to career, and effective partnerships. Many of the tools and the resources that we share today, and along with many others that are available in the Innovation Pathways Toolkit, are organized by these guiding principles to support you in your planning. And so to date, if you come to the next slide, we haven't spent a detailed amount of time talking through core characteristics of innovation pathways. So these characteristics are also required in order to receive Innovation Pathways designation, and they help fulfill those guiding principles that we just mentioned on the last slide. And Massachusetts recognizes that these 6 core characteristics, when they're integrated in a coherent set of strategies and services for students, work towards ensuring high quality pathway programming. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Jennifer Guakin to share a little bit more detail about each of these core characteristics.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kelly. So I'd like for you all to think of these not as 6 in addition to the 5, as Kelly kind of intimated earlier. It's really the 5 guiding principles, but these 6 sort of slot into those 5. So I guess we could go ahead and advance the slide. Great. So on the advising point, what we're looking for, obviously, in the pathway is a well-designed college and career advising sort of progression. We want all the students to have an individual plan, which would be managed online. And of course, many of you have already told us about your use of an electronic tool. I think the vast majority would probably use Naviance, of those of us in the room. There's also MIFA Pathways, which is a free option, MassCIS, Career Cruising, which is actually now known as Zello. There's some other systems out there, but we really want you in Part B to offer details about this. You know, how are you using this online platform to manage the individual plans that each student should have? Career development education is just a mere aspect of advising. I mean, it's also encompasses career awareness. Well, it's a whole gamut, career awareness, exploration, and immersion activities that are built in. Again, we're looking for a progression. So with college access and these activities built in along with the post-secondary plan. Could you advance the slide, please? So in your Part A, you told us about your selection of the industry sector, and you've chosen one of the 5, or some of you have chosen more than one, but you're justifying your pathway using labor market information. You've had conversations with your Mass Hire Board, you're already involved in a partnership, but what we're really looking for is the broad industry sector sort of orientation here with your pathway. Could you advance, please? Integrated instruction. So here we're looking for, and you've already presented us with sort of a scope and sequence, but you've told us about the courses that you're going to offer in your pathway. We're looking for at least 2 technical courses aligned with the industry sector and at least 2 advanced courses. Those can be dual enrollment, AP, or other college level courses, the idea being that they're 4 distinct courses, there's not overlap. But what we're really wanting to see in your Part B is that, you know, they're not just courses that are chosen sort of ad hoc, that they're actually, that they're very carefully selected and that they're relevant, highly relevant to the industry sector. Work-based learning, you've told us about your plans for, or your aspirations for giving students a 100-hour work-based learning experience, either an internship or a capstone. We're looking for some quality elements here. You're going to need to identify someone who is going to be responsible at the high school as a staff liaison. We're interested in hearing more about sort of the activities that students are going to be engaging in as part of their 100-hour work-based learning experience. You know, what will the students be doing exactly during those 100 hours? Use of the Massachusetts Work-Based Learning Plan, and then we want to hear about what that end of the experience product is, whether it's an oral presentation, a video, some sort of written report. And then the last, I think this is the last one here, maybe not, but the pathway will enable students to make progress towards a credential that could be an industry recognized credential, which is appropriate in the instance of some of the pathways, or it could be college credits towards, obviously, post-secondary credential is as appropriate. That could be a certificate, associate's, or bachelor's degree. But what we want, and this fits into advising as well, is we want the students to know about the credentials that are relevant to their chosen industry sector. Again, they can attain them while they're in high school if it's appropriate, or they'll at least have the opportunity to build some skills while they're in high school that will enable them to go on to and attain them via post-secondary education. So we do want to see within explicit linkages to post-secondary. And again, like with their MyCap, this should be happening to inform them of their post-secondary plan relating to college, or whatever comes next. We're saying that Innovation Pathways is not a destination. Once they've completed the pathway, that's it. The Innovation Pathways should be leading somewhere else, ideally to post-secondary education, credentials, but certainly so they can have whatever they need to have to be participatory in their industry sector once they've completed what they need to complete.
Great, thank you, Jennifer.
I feel like it's always interesting. Those 6 core characteristics actually were born of our New Skills for Youth engagement. So again, I think that you can probably get some more light in those 6 core characteristics, but again, they all fit under the 5 guiding principles.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. So now we want to hear from you a little bit about how planning for these characteristics is going for you. So in just a minute, we'll launch a poll in Zoom, so it should pop right up on your screen to let us know which core characteristic are you finding the most challenging to plan for as you put together your Part B application. This is by no means binding. I'm sure as you continue to plan, the answer will shift over time, but sort of just to get a pulse of where you are as of right now, which characteristic has posed the most challenge or brought up the most questions for you as you plan for Part B submission. So I will launch that poll. You should see it pop up on your screen now. And if you could take a moment to just respond and let us know which core characteristic is sort of posing the most challenging or the most questions for you currently. So I'll give you like another 15 seconds to respond. It's looking like our winner here might be work-based learning, which I think certainly we've been hearing from all of you have been sharing that, particularly in our current context, work-based learning has been a barrier and a challenge in making those connections with partners has been a challenge. If you were with us in early October, we had a workshop on Part A application preparation, and a similar poll was conducted around the 5 guiding principles. And at that time, the most challenging guiding principles were equitable access, guided academic pathways, and effective partnerships. And so I'm seeing some similarities with sort of the challenge we found in the guiding principles preparing for Part A seem to be some of the ones that are continuing into Part B. And so thanks for sharing that with us. And certainly as we go through, there are lots of resources within the Innovation Pathways Toolkit that can help support some of your thinking and planning and designing related to your pathway programming. And so in fact, if we could actually go to the next slide. As you continue to work on those design elements, the Innovation Pathway Toolkit is a resource for you. And so we wanted to make sure to include a reminder here today. It includes processes, tools, materials, and examples that are related to the essential components of pathway program design. And so these tools and resources that are included in the toolkit are certainly not exhaustive. And we don't intend that your design and development teams sort of necessarily make use of each and every single tool and resource that's there, but rather this toolkit is really intended to support a variety of design, development, and implementation needs in a way that's customizable according to your school and your team and your pathways particular context. So that toolkit, while we sort of won't talk through the whole thing today, can be accessed with the Innovation Pathways Technical Assistance website, and that link is at the bottom of your screen now, and also was put into the chat by Diana. And so as a quick overview, if we go to the next slide, the toolkit is made up of 4 parts. And at this stage in your design process, Section 2 and Section 3 are likely the most helpful to you. Section 2 includes resources that are authored and released by DESE to support planning and design of pathway elements, and is organized by those core characteristics that Jennifer just shared a moment ago. And so the resources there include the Massachusetts Labor Market Blueprints, the Model Internship Guide, and MyCap tools, along with a host of others. Under Section 3 of the toolkit, there's a recommended 4-part design process with accompanying tools under each component of the design process. So we click to the next slide, will show us a quick visual of the 4-part design process, which is intended to guide school teams through a process of pathway development. And so although the phases and the steps are numbered, rarely are they approached sort of simply in chronological order. It's often that multiple steps are occurring at once. Sometimes you have to retrace steps to make sure you're successful. But these phases and steps, as they're listed in this section of the toolkit, are in an order that can serve as a logical reference for your design teams in engaging in pathway design and development. And in particular, we want to highlight that designing and planning phase, which is where we imagine you all are at the moment. So under that designing and planning phase, this is where your team is brainstorming, mapping, and assessing existing college and career readiness policies, programs, and practices in your school and in your district. You've already gone through the process of identifying growing market needs in the community and prioritized industries and occupations that will be the focus of your pathway. And under this phase, it's where we recommend the planning team take time to sort of deeply understand the knowledge, skills, and competencies that students should know and be able to demonstrate for that specific pathway sector. This phase is also where you'll develop an action plan that includes specific task decisions and timelines. And on the next slide, we actually want to share just 2 specific resources to make you aware of. The first tool we want to draw your attention to is the Innovation Pathways Final Criteria Planning Tool. So this particular tool was developed last year as a planning tool to help support school teams that are applying for Part B application. It's arranged by the 5 guiding principles and lists each individual indicator that applicants are responsible for addressing in the Part B application. So essentially, this tool can act as your checklist document to ensure that you have sort of each and every one of the components that's part of the application process. And so we recommend using this with your teams in planning meetings so that you can sort of like check that box about where you are with each indicator and each application requirement. We'll get a chance in just a moment to explore this resource a bit more deeply. So we'll give you time for a bit of a closer read and sort of take a look at those sections. But within that document, you're able to sort of track where you are in terms of not started, in progress, or complete in each of the indicators that are listed under each guiding principle. It's also worth noting that a similar tool exists for Part A applications, and we heard feedback from many of you that you use that tool for for planning for your Part A submission. So if you're familiar with the Part A criteria planning tool, this is the complementary tool and resource specific to Part B. The second resource we want to draw your attention to is the Innovation Pathways Self-Assessment Tool. So rather than being a checklist like the previous tool, this tool was created to allow planning teams to self-evaluate where you are in your program design. This is also organized by the 5 guiding principles, and under each guiding principle, the tool asks you to self-assess whether you feel like that particular element is initiating, emerging and developing, or established and sustained, and allows you to provide sort of short, or within it, it provides short descriptions of each indicator to use as a benchmark for your assessment. So it gives you some sample language and some sample practices to sort of evaluate where you might be on that scale. And this tool provides a place for you to list evidence of your rating, detail any key challenges, and sort of propose next steps related to any particular guiding principle. This tool can be used as a baseline and then sort of periodic assessment to keep track of your progress and improvement over time. So it can be used where you are sort of at the very beginning as you're embarking on your planning journey and starting to implement your pathway programs, but it can also be used along the way to check in with where you are and where you need to focus in on once you've already begun implementation. And so again, we recommend using this with your team, whether you use it to evaluate as individuals and then sort of compare results, or if you come to a consensus as a team to determine your self-rating. This is a tool that might be particularly helpful to you, not only as you're in the planning process now, but in the future and as you're implementing each year. So
I will also add to that we do have an intended webinar that will be coming up later this school year that will really focus on progress monitoring, self-assessment, and evaluations and that side of Pathways. It will be aimed at thinking about early implementation, but it could be a good preview for those of you who are moving on and have been awarded or anticipate being awarded designation.
Great plug. Thanks, Diana, for mentioning that. And so, like I said, we'll get a chance in just a little while to talk through the final criteria planning tool, and you'll get a chance to sort of look at that a bit more deeply. My colleagues did share links to each of those resources, so you can click right to that resource in the chat box. But before we move on, sort of take a closer look, we wanted to get a chance to hear from one of our existing designees about their experience. If we can click to the next slide. We know that designing, planning, and applying for innovation pathways is a tremendous amount of work. It is particularly a lot of work this year when we're all adapting to new ways of working and communicating. So as part of our webinar today, we really wanted to give an opportunity for you to hear from an existing designee school about their experience in the planning process, and particularly what their experience with Part B was like. And so if we could click to our next slide, we're so excited to have Mel Jean Noel from Norwood Public Schools with us today. Norwood became an Innovation Pathways designee in 2019 with a healthcare pathway. Mel is the career education specialist at Norwood High School. And in this role, she facilitates the development of career education programming, career pathways, and provided practical application to the mandate that all students are college, career, and life ready. So she's passionate about helping students to discover their why and how they can use high school as a launching point to college, career, and life. So Mel, we're so thankful to have you with us here today, and I'll turn it over to you to share your wisdom.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. I am a little bit taken aback by the poll because my specific information that I have here today isn't on work-based learning, although I can speak a little bit about that since everyone is so concerned about work-based learning. But what I can tell you is that enhanced student support really is the foundation of innovation pathways. And I think to speak to that a little bit, one of the enlightened moments that I had was I started my education career in vocational education. And so that is the foundation from which I bring a lot of my experience. And I know that vocational programs have a lot of wraparound support, and particularly because those students have the same vocational or career and technical teachers for several years. And so they're able to build really strong relationships with not only their vocational teachers, but also with the guidance counselors that are assigned to that particular vocation, other support personnel like the Mass Hire personnel that work with vocational programs to get them work-based learning. But what I can say is that relationship building is integral to the success of your program. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think that I noticed from day one is that we needed to build a program in which was different than any other program that was at our high school. We have a school to work program at our high school in which students work half of the day and then they attend classes half of the day. But in thinking about our innovation pathway program, we wanted to make sure that we had specific and unique opportunities for these students to balance both work, education, and, like I said, this relationship building with an adult in the building. Next slide, please. So when we were building out that NHS healthcare innovation pathway, from day one, from the initial recruitment process, we knew that enhanced student support had to be part of this program. So we decided to make it a collaborative approach with our middle school. So we work with the personnel at the middle school to identify opportunities to push in and to educate students about career pathways, and particularly about this new pathway. Can you hear me okay? Is everyone okay? Okay. we decided that we had to work with the middle school on a deeper level to kind of find out what were the challenges, what were the setbacks, what were the strengths of those middle school students and what they were coming into high school with. The second part about it is generally in middle school at the end of the 8th grade year, there is an overview of the program of studies, and we had to make the distinction that the healthcare innovation pathway was not an elective, that it's an actual program, and that we intended for students to participate in the program throughout the time that they were in high school. Generally, when they're selecting electives, they can sometimes think that this is something that they may want to do for 1 year, but that this program was designed to support them over the course of several years. We designed specific academic roadmaps with advising that would help not only guidance counselors, but myself as a career counselor kind of outline what that plan might look like at the start of 9th grade all the way through 12th grade. And I think that was really helpful for students to be able to get that kind of infographic and see the program outlined even in 8th grade and make sort of an informed decision, and the kind of informed decisions that we want them to make, not only just in high school, but throughout life, and how important it is to have a plan. We also have an extensive application process. That process moved from paper to online. We designed a very simple Google form where students could give us more information about their interests, not really us screening them, but seeing who the students were as people, what their interests were, what their activities were, what they were thinking that they might want to do in the future. And that sort of guided us in building the number of supports that we would need. The students also participate in an informational interview. And then we also have an orientation for both students and parents that happens at the end of the summer. And then the students have an orientation once classes begin in September. So next slide, please. So like I said, my focus really today is to talk about enhanced student support, because I really believe that it is the glue that keeps the pathway together, that keeps it functioning, that makes, that gives it very great momentum. And I think if we didn't have advanced student support and COVID-19 hit our program, I think our program would have really fallen to the ground. But because we have so much wraparound support for students to promote their academic success and course completion, and to really still develop their interests and their plans, I think that is what has kept students motivated, engaged in the Pathway program. Next slide, please. So like Jennifer said so eloquently, like career advising definitely falls into this guiding principle. Like she said, it's a great characteristic to sort of support the overall development of the pathway. And I think that career advising has allowed me to learn each student and to learn what their needs are, to learn what their interests are, and to help them develop a plan over time. We have just welcomed our second cohort of students in the pathway, and I can speak to the strength of career advising in terms of helping students develop that plan to guide their learning, to guide their work-based learning, to guide their selections of courses that they take, and also to guide their interests in post-secondary linkages. And so I believe that one of the strongly recommended and advised things for MyCap potential designees is the MyCap training, which we went as a team, our school, it was our high school principal, one of our guidance personnel, myself, and one teacher. And I can say that through that training, through that extensive training, because I believe it's 3 to 4 trainings over the course of an academic year, we really were able to sit down and think about what makes sense in terms of our school. And MyCap really is the student's process to own. It's us there to guide, to help support, and to create these lessons and activities that really support their growth and development over time. And like I said, MyCap really does help build the relationship between that trusted adult and that student. And I can say that over the course of the last 2 years with our Innovation Pathway program, I have built very strong relationships with our students because we designed the program to have this kind of support in place. Next slide, please. So NHS Career Advising and Student Support. So in terms of personnel, we have the program director, who is basically me running around like a chicken with my head cut off, to be honest. But I love every second of it, connecting with students, building the program, building out even student interest. When students say this is something that they're interested in exploring, you know, I am the person that is kind of exploring that option, not just for that student, but for all students, and seeing what opportunities might be available there. We have a program facilitator. That program facilitator is actually in the classroom with the students, which is a great thing. He has been with them for the last 2 years. He has built a relationship with them, and when students are finding themselves in academic or non-academic challenges, they can go to either myself or the program facilitator, and we're able to problem solve and troubleshoot and help keep that student on the pathway. And I think depending on what your schedule is like with your school, which is another key piece of building a successful pathway, having a program facilitator who's going to travel with the students throughout their 4 years on the pathway is an invaluable resource that I think that we knew from day one, but we didn't realize how integral it would actually be during the COVID-19 era. Each student still has a guidance counselor that they will meet with on a regular basis to talk about college and post-secondary linkages, as well as their academic performance while they are in the program. In terms of program design elements, all of the students in the NHS Innovation Pathway program are cohorted, and that is, I can't even tell you how important that is to have them cohorted together, because they're relationship building horizontally as well as vertically. So they look at myself and the program facilitator as kind of like, you know, the leads in the program, but they are really getting so much valuable information from their colleagues as well. And that's kind of preparing them not only for post-secondary, but for the real world. And so cohorting those students together, whether it's in their study blocks or whether it's in an advising class, is just so valuable to their overall growth and development. We have a flexible schedule when it comes to pathways design, and at the end of all of the other scheduling that we're doing with other electives, we are able to move things around if we need to make sure that students get that enhanced support that they need, and to make sure those students are together. Students have group and individual meetings once a term. Each student meets with myself, and then they also meet on an annual basis with their guidance counselor. We have mentors from industry that the student meets with several times per year. And then we've developed a two-way communication digital document that's housed on a student's Google Drive, in which they go back and forth with myself, their guidance counselor, and the program facilitator. So we have a lot of support in place for students to develop their individual learning plan and to be successful in technical courses, in college and AP courses, and also in their internship or capstone. I think there was a question. Does anyone want to shoot the question off, just so I can?
Hi, Mel. I was just wondering, how many pathways do you have at your school?
So we have one pathway currently, and we are building a second pathway.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Mel, do you have one more slide, or is that the end of your formal presentation?
I think that is the end of my formal presentation.
Excellent. Well, first, thank you so much. I'm feeling so inspired by you and what you've shared. And I think, particularly your pieces about thoughtful student support design, and with sort of MyCap and relationship building being that backbone of personalization for your programming. I think what you've shared has given us a lot to think about. And so thank you for that. I have a question to kick us off. I failed to mention this before we started, but we do have a few moments for Q&A with Mel before we move into our next part of the agenda. And so if you haven't already, if you could put your questions in the chat box, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question. And so while those are coming in, actually, I'll get us kicked off to say, Mel, you just shared that you will be sort of adding a second pathway. And how are you thinking about sort of scaling your student support design for a second pathway, or more than 2 pathways in the future?
Well, I think that we're going to still keep that same support personnel design. What will happen is, as students sort of graduate into the various levels of the program, they'll be able to be more self-directed, and we may reduce the number of individual meetings that a student may need as they move into year 3 and year 4 of the program. So that's how we're able to kind of manage the caseload and the intense case management.
Thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat, but wondering if anyone wants to take themselves off of mute and ask their question. It looks like Fran has his hand raised. So Fran, you want to ask your question?
Hi, Mel. I'm wondering, did you have to add positions once you found out that you had this designation?
So my position wasn't initially one of the positions that was at the high school. I started with connecting activities. And so once we decided that this was going to be something that was a district priority, at the district level, they decided to add this career education specialist position. And that's what I would say is getting your district on board and to understand the value of having this support personnel is really, really integral, I think, to the success of multiple pathway programs, especially when you're talking about building out, more than 1 or 2 programs. You definitely need that point person.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question here. Meredith asks, do you have any tips particular to the Part B application? So since you were in their shoes not that long ago, if there are any sort of words of wisdom or tips and tricks that you would share with the group around the Part B application? So one of the tips or tricks that I would say is definitely there should be a team approach to the Part B application. One of the things that I would do is I would drop the application into a Google Doc and break up the sections of the application within that team. And you're able to track the changes, you're able to see who's touched which parts of the document, and then meeting kind of regularly to bounce ideas off of each person that is on that team, and definitely talk with your middle school if you can, prior to touching the Part B of the application, so that you can kind of determine what's realistic and what's possible, especially in the age of COVID. Because I think we might be in this a little bit next year too. I hate to say it, but I think you might be right there. Thanks for that. It's a small piece, or sounds like a small piece, but I think just dropping in Google Doc and sort of using that as your main mode of communication could make a huge difference. So lots of head nodding and some pens writing while you were mentioning that. Jennifer is curious about your MassHire involvement in Part B. Were your MassHire partners at the table as part of your Part B application completion?
definitely. MassHire has been instrumental in not only building a partnership with Norwood Hospital, who is our lead partner, but also advising us on opportunities that may be available to students from what they're seeing like across the state of Massachusetts. So that's definitely a resource for you to kind of develop your program based on their kind of state view of what's going on in terms of work-based learning. And what I will say in terms of work-based learning is work-based learning doesn't work unless you know the students. So if you don't know the students, work-based learning will not work. So you're kind of worried about like the logistical part of it. Knowing the student is the best part of work-based learning, and placing them in an appropriate placement for them and matching them with the appropriate mentor. And so if you don't have that advanced student support and enhanced student support, you're not going to have the correct placements. You'll have a lot of kids not showing up for work, and all of those things that we know can be challenging with a youth population. So I cannot stress that enough, cannot.
It's so right, Mel. And I think I'll do a quick plug. We did a webinar last spring, so that resource can be found on the Innovation Pathways website, around relationship building between students and mentors, whether they be school-based mentors or industry-based mentors. So that might be a resource, if you've not already seen it, to take a look at that recording or some of the resources that were shared through that webinar. And so I think we'll have time for one more question. If anyone wants to pull themselves off mute and ask the question, I'll also take a moment to look at the chat to see if anything else has come in. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions. And I see a correction or confirmation that they have 47 students in the healthcare pathway. So thanks for clarifying that, Mel. Well, thank you, Mel. Thanks so much for sharing your words of wisdom with us, for sharing tips and tricks. We'll have a round of applause or jazz hands for Mel. Thank you so much. And if you're able, we'd love for you to stick around for the rest of the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Diana to walk us through a specific tool.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to make sure we carve out time for breakouts, because I want to give folks a chance to absorb some of what they're hearing and chat with each other. I'm really hearing a lot of vibes from you all that you like hearing from others who are in the same shoes. So I won't spend too much time here, but do want to talk you through a couple of things. So earlier today, I chatted, and I'm going to do it again so that you don't lose the link. The direct link to the tool that I'm going to talk about right now, which is the criteria planning tool for Part B. So next slide, please. And so this tool, for those who didn't use the Part A version of this, goes guiding principle by guiding principle. And, you know, these core characteristics are sort of embedded in those guiding principles. But it goes guiding principle by guiding principle, and it gives you a chance to, particularly as you grow your teams, as you've heard from Mel, and we've sort of mentioned this as well, this is the time to make sure this is not a solo effort. Bring in Mass Hire, bring in district level folks if you're at the school, bring out school level folks if you're at the district. Even if you can have the opportunity to let additional colleagues or even a student representative weigh in. Those are all wonderful folks to have at the table. This tool can help you sort of figure out where you are in the process and think about where you need to go next and what you need to focus on. It's not that far away that the Part B deadline is coming. So this can give you a sense on where things stand. I love Mel's idea of working on a Google document. But what's nice about this is as you begin to work on that Google document, this can be what you can do when you come together in a meeting to sort of step back and decide where things stand and what needs more energy. I was going to have us pause and do a little bit of self-evaluation for planning purposes. I think I'm going to abbreviate that and just give you 1 minute to look through the tool. And I would love if you skim through and think about any one criteria that jumps out at you, maybe two, that jump out at you as something that is either confusing, something you're struggling with, or something you know deserves some of your attention in the very near future. We're going to go into breakout groups in just a minute, and in breakouts, you'll have a chance to sort of talk to each other about some of those things that stand out. So I'll just put about 1 minute on the clock for you to do that on your own. Again, thinking about, next slide, Callie. Thinking about which sections, really more about which questions does this raise for you? Which criteria stand out as raising additional questions? All right. So I think that was not very long, but hopefully enough time for something to surface for you as you're looking through this and thinking about your Part B, where you might need some additional support or energy to focus on. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Laura to talk a little bit about what we might be doing in breakouts. We will have short breakouts, but I think they'll be valuable for you all to chat with each other briefly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diana. So we are going to give you an opportunity in groups of 3 or 4 to connect about really around this tool and also what you've been hearing so far. Callie, if you wouldn't mind advancing just a couple slides. One more and one more. Perfect. Okay. So just a reminder, when we go into community spaces, breakout spaces in particular, we like to provide a reminder for some community agreements for working together. So I'll let you take a second just to familiarize yourself with a few of the shared community agreements we've been using in the Innovation Pathways work so far. All right, thank you. And if you could go to the next one, please. Great. So we are going to provide about 10 minutes in your breakout spaces, and our invitation for you is first start with introductions. You may find yourself in a space where you already know some of the folks that are in that breakout room with you. But in the likelihood that that's not the case, we ask if you could just start with introductions and you can share a little bit about where your process has been so far. And then really what we'd like you to center your discussion on is what specific criteria is standing out to you right now? And then what might some of your early thinking be around what next steps are to advance your work in the area of that criteria? We encourage you to consider using a round robin process. You'll see again, of course, one of our community agreements around sort of sharing airtime. We will send you prompts along the way to let you know how much time is remaining in the group so that you can make sure that you can share airspace as well through that format. And then if we could just advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you'll be getting a prompt in just a moment to join your breakout space, and we'll ask you to please unmute yourself and share your video as you're able so that your peers can sort of see you and hear you. If you have any questions, there is a sort of call for help button that we're happy to assist you in that space. And one of my colleagues has just shared in the chat box the discussion prompts we're inviting you to consider for your reference. Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. Give it just another minute or so for folks to come back from their breakout spaces.
At 3 seconds, everybody should be back. All right, I think everyone's back now, Laura.
All right, fantastic. We really hope that that was a fruitful space for you. As was mentioned before, we know that that's one thing we commonly hear from folks in the Innovation Pathways work is that the time to connect with one another and learn from one another is really fruitful. Even value just in hearing some synergy that other folks are struggling with some of the things you are. That has a tremendous amount of value, especially this year. So we are going to transition in just a moment to sort of an open Q&A part of the day where we hope that anything that came up in your breakouts or anything else on your mind, we can have some space to try to answer some of those questions for you. But to kick us off with that, we'd love to hear from each of your breakout spaces, just 1 or 2 things that you had a chance to chat about. And I know that there were 3 groups. So if you happen to pay attention to what your group number was, let's see if we have anybody from group 1 who's willing to share just a little bit about what you chatted about in your 10 minutes. Feel free to just unmute yourself.
I'll go ahead and go. There were 3 of us in our group and we had a lot in common. We definitely were talking about the need to market our schools and to definitely really have a lot of offerings for our students, and Innovation Pathways allows us to do this. And then we were talking about the challenges of marketing and implementing Innovation Pathways in the COVID world. All 3 of our schools, actually, I think I remember right. I know Joanne's was, is Where's still remote? I can't remember. But most of us were still remote. So, I mean, with students all remote. So it puts a whole nother spin on things that you can't have events here, even with students or family members. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Jill. And I want to sort of tag on one of the pieces you said early in your share out too, that idea of marketing your school. And I think that that's something really important that the pandemic has maybe heightened folks' awareness of, is even when you're maybe the only school that students have a choice for, it still matters how you're communicating with your community about what you offer and what makes your school unique. So I really love that that's something that you all had a chance to connect about. Thank you. How about group number 2?
I guess I'll talk. I'm group number 2. Dale Fornoff. I am the guidance director down here at DY on Cape Cod. I think it was just nice to have a conversation with people who are having some similar concerns. We kind of talked about our desire to gain a pathway sometimes and how to recruit students, you know, from 8th to the 9th grade level. We're in a little different position just because our high school is 8th through 12th. So we already have them here in a captive audience. You know, we just talked about the differences and how to target that. And we all seem to have tech schools in our area, so that are scooping some of these kids up beforehand. And so we had a little conversation about that, and just kind of brainstormed a little bit on how to do some recruitment.
Great, thank you. So in a different way, it sounds like there's a little bit of synergy with group 1 with thinking about how you're communicating and marketing opportunities to students. That's great. How about group number 3?
I can represent group 3. We're lucky we had Mel in with us, and we talked a little bit about being a smaller school and how to manage some of the demands with our current staffing load. And she had made a suggestion based on the work-based placements and the needs surrounding that, to maybe look at re-examining staffing for guidance, and if possible, expanding like a part-time career counselor to a more full-time position. And then we also just talked about some of the challenges of managing everything from a small school perspective, from, you know, student enrollment to having some teachers with one foot in the pathway and then the rest of the time teaching maybe their traditional assigned load, and some positives and challenges with that.
All right, so we are going to provide some space for Q&A here. I think really the only sort of principal piece I'll say is let's operate this space like a classroom, where we tell our students, you know, don't hesitate to ask the question you have, because it's really likely somebody else has it too. So we're going to open this space up to any questions you have about the process right now. And I'm going to ask my colleagues, my CCE and DESE colleagues in particular, feel free to jump right in, and Mel too, if you feel like you've got an appropriate response for folks' questions. But you can use the raise your hand emoji. You can just unmute yourself, or a small enough group. But what questions do you have for us?
Just adding Mel's still with us too, so groups who didn't get Mel in their group can ask the questions that you still might have held on to for her as well.
I always feel like no matter how many people are in this, like I'm monopolizing the airtime somehow, but as Jen knows, that's not unusual. I just want to say, I don't know about everyone else, but when I got invited to fill out Part B, I also got a like a feedback sheet from the reviewers that said what areas were weak. So I'm just wondering, is that like the blueprint to fill that out? Is that like my primary guide? Does that mean the rest of stuff in Part A was okay, and this is where I should focus? I'm just I have a one-on-one, poor Jen and Callie, tomorrow with them already, so I don't want to monopolize it, but I'm just wondering if that's the reviewers looked at it and said this is where you're particularly weak and everything else was all right.
Well, I wouldn't say particularly weak. I would say those are areas that, like you said, that where you could devote some additional attention in your Part B. Yeah, just use Part B as an opportunity to provide the clarifications that we're seeking, and you know, everybody has something that they can work on, sharpen. You're definitely not singled out at all. You guys are always welcome to ask questions, like outside of this opportunity. Email's always working until it's not.
I have a silly question, but I did not see, when is Part B due? I'm sorry, I did not see that.
No worry, it's February 11th. I'll put that
Okay,
in the chat.
thank you.
We have a couple of like closing slides, and that's listed there too. So in addition to having it, I think it's in the email that you perhaps got from Jennifer. We'll also make sure it's in this slide deck, and it'll be in a few other places so that you have that handy.
And something I'd like to add, as part of the process, we interview all folks who submit a Part B application. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of get to know you better. Sometimes what comes across an application might need a little bit of probing. And so we'll give you questions also that are tailored in advance of those interviews. Those will be scheduled, let's see, probably the last, well, obviously we avoid your February break, but they'll be scheduled in February. But just want to let you know that that is coming down the pike, and just that you should view it as an opportunity, not as an I gotcha, but really as a conversation opportunity for us to all be around the same table, probably be virtual table, but to sort of get a better sense of what's written and what you're actually planning to do.
Is there a way to kind of like just send out a list of everyone's emails who's on this and identify like what pathways they're in? Because in the group that I was in, like Meredith and I have schools of a similar size.
Okay. Yeah.
So we might have something in common. We might have commonality between the pathways that we're going through. Even though we're widely disparate geographic regions, there might be some kind of networking opportunities as we go through this process. So that would be helpful because no one really has time to talk on the phone these days, but you can shoot off an email and then someone can, respond whenever they want, or then say, if you call me during this time this week, I can speak or something like that. So that would be helpful.
Sure.
Another thing is that anybody involved in the PLC for new applicants for Innovation Pathways, I do think it was a plan for that group to, have email addresses swap for anybody who's part of that group. So that's another go-to possibility for you to be connected with folks.
That's right. And there are many of you actually that are on today are part of the new applicant PLC, and we've just scheduled our next meeting for December 15th. So you should have received a calendar invite earlier today. And so certainly in that group, we'll be sharing emails, information about Pathway, all of that, so you can keep in touch with one another.
Is that just for people that do not have Innovation Pathways yet, or is that for anybody?
So we have actually two sort of tracks, if you will, of PLC. So we have one for existing designees, so those who have already received designation, and then a PLC specifically for folks like all of you who are in the process of applying. And so I happen to be facilitating with some additional CCE colleagues the new applicant PLC, and we have a little bit of space. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know. You can send me a little note in the chat. Or send an email afterwards, and we'd be happy to get you into that group if it's of interest.
And if any of you are in both shoes, like you have a pathway that's an early implementation and one that is not, I think I would say you could probably choose. There'll be enough duplication between the two that you probably don't want to necessarily be in both. But you could choose or divide and conquer. You and a colleague can each go to one. Reach out to us directly if you want it, if you aren't yet in a PLC and want to be. I'm not sure the registration links are still active, but we will happily add you to our lists if you want to be added. Anybody?
Yeah, thanks for that, Diana. So we have a few important pieces to share with you and touch base with you before the end of our time today. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is, if you have any lingering questions that haven't been answered yet, please pass them along in the chat. We're here for you, so we're happy to follow up with you via email or other forms of communication if you do have any of those lingering questions. You have access to post it broadly in the chat, and I believe you'll have access if there's something targeted that you'd like to send to one of the sort of co-hosts of today. You're welcome to do that as well. And with that said, I'm going to pass it.
Oh, Laura, your audio cut out, but I think you handed it over to me. So if you don't mind advancing the slide, please. So the Part B applications, as I imagine everyone here knows, are due February 11th, which sounds like it's far away, but isn't as far away as it sounds. It's just about 2 months. And then there will be those applicant interviews that Jennifer just mentioned, with the aim of having those designations conferred in April of 2021 to launch for the following year. Just, you know, the IP website, which you see linked at the bottom, is the DESE hosted website about all of the specifics of the application process. Anything that you need to know in terms of concrete items are there. In addition, the website we shared earlier contains a lot of technical assistance support, the toolkit and items like that. So those would be two websites to both have on your bookmarks for this year. Next slide, please. So a few tips around completing the application, and these we collaborated with our DESE colleagues to make sure are sharp ones for you all. One is to really make sure you complete the narrative, typing directly into the Word version of the document, compiling exhibits and labeling each to really make sure it's easy for the reviewers to see what you're referring to and what each item is supposed to be. When you're ready to organize all your documents, narrative first, followed by all your exhibits, sort of thinking of them as attachments, and making sure that it's submitted in a way that's as user-friendly as possible for those who are going to be reviewing. Ensuring the completeness of these things and then ultimately turning that into a unified PDF. Again, this is just for usability for those who are receiving your application. We wanted to pause for a second because there have been some questions around the student demographics projection chart. It is not a part of your revised Part B application. So I wanted to make sure you knew that. If you have any specific questions about demographics as relate to your pathway, that could be a separate conversation that could happen in one of our office hours opportunities to come, or in a one-on-one conversation, or you could email Jennifer with a specific question. But I would say in general, hopefully not having that be part of your Part B application removes that confusion, which I did hear from a few of you in your registration for this event today. Finally, once you've got that unified PDF, you will mail your application directly to the address shown right here. And that particular address, it's important. I know I've heard from at least a few of you who didn't know where to send prior applications. So make note of that, please. But we're also happy to help. Next slide, please. So I wanted to make sure you know that this is not the end of support either. Many of you have signed up for the opportunity to have a personalized conversation tomorrow with Callie and Jennifer. We can obviously accommodate, I think we're full for tomorrow, so we can accommodate any of you all who didn't get a slot tomorrow that do want to have that more personalized conversation about your application. Please reach out to myself or Callie or Jennifer. Any of us can help make sure we set you up with one of those conversations in the coming weeks. We will also be offering, we don't have a date for it yet, but we will be offering an open office hours in January as it gets closer to the deadline for you to be able to ask some of those quick questions that you'd like support with. On January 13th, there is a Design Institute workshop that is very strongly recommended for any schools going through the application process. It's focused on equity. It is a little bit of a longer workshop. It's from 9 to 11 a.m. on that day, but it is very interactive, and we are bringing in a few of my colleagues from CCE. A lot of our work at CCE is focused on equity, and we ran an institute similar to this last year that schools found useful regardless of if they were in the application or implementation phase. But this time we're really thinking about those of you in the application process and the ways in which equity, not only for access, but also support and engagement can be integrated into your application. So I strongly recommend your joining us. Beyond that, we'll have additional Design Institute workshops, webinars, and spotlights on existing programs to come throughout the year. So you can find all of those on our website, which is linked here. Next slide, please. So I want to take a quick second, and I promise it's worth it to stick with us while you do this, because there's a really great video I want to close us with. But I will give us 90 seconds for you all to quickly type this or click the link in the chat or type in this URL to give us your 2 minutes of feedback on today's workshop. We're going to be working closely with you all in the coming months, and I really want to make sure we're hearing from you to make sure the support that we're providing is useful. And if there's anything that you need that you aren't getting, that we can try to find a way for you to get what you need. So put 90 seconds on the clock, and then we'll move on to one of the best videos of the year for sure. All right, next slide, Callie. All right, if you haven't finished your feedback for us, you can keep that open and do it later, but take a second to watch this video. We want to close this on a positive note. It's related to innovation pathways, but also just sort of adorable. Before we launch it, I just want to say thank you for being here. You can leave when the video ends, and we look forward to seeing you in the next couple of weeks at some of the other opportunities that are coming up. Take care and enjoy.
They saying?
Yeah.
We tell everybody what they can be when they grow up. They can be anything. You ready?
Yes.
Let's go.
You can be an A. You can be an architect. Get a building to kiss the sky. You can be a B. You can be a biochemist. Make business save lives. You can be a C. Computer software developer. Programs, systems, and files. You can be a D. You can be a dentist. Because everybody loves to smile. You can be an E. You can be an engineer. Solve problems of all kinds. Chemical, mechanical, electrical. Use the power of your mind. You can be an F. You can be a firefighter. Fight fires in red trucks. You can be a G. Gastroenterologist. Build problems in the gut. You can be an H. Hospital administrator. Hospitals need leaders. You can be an I. Intelligence officer. The FBI kind of people. You can be a J. You can be a judge. Help people who seek justice. You can be a K. Kindergarten teacher. Those kids are young and restless. You can be an L. You can be a lawyer. Cause people need to know their rights. You can be an M. Mobile app developer. Like the people that made Fortnite. You can be an N. You can be a nurse. Medical kit for the masses. You can be an O. Optometrist for people that need eyeglasses. You can be a P. Paramedic for medical emergencies. You can be a Q. Quantum physicist for particles and energy. You can be an R. Research University president, more the future of your nation. You can be a video game designer, or Xbox and PlayStation. You can be a web developer. It's an online occupation. Now take that S. You can be your own boss, with impact on the world. And with that Y, you can be your own boss. Tell me boy and girl. And with that Z, Z's is strive. You can reach the sky if you try. Just don't be a Z, just don't be a zombie. And let the world pass you by.
Way to go, Sam!
Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.